Hello, friends. Today we're going to learn about the Rad Riverways of Southern Oregon and all the awesome animals that call these waters home.
If you've ever spent time in or near a river or stream, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of life down there. Take a look at these clips of the Smith River. As you watch, go ahead and write down what you notice, what you wonder, and what these videos remind you of. Three types of fish that are commonly found in the waterways of Southern Oregon are the Pacific lamprey, the Jenny Creek sucker, and several different kinds of Pacific salmonids, which includes several species of salmon and trout.
Salmonids are what we call anadromous fish. That means they begin and end their lives in freshwater and spend several years in the ocean in between. There are both trout and salmon species that make up the salmonid group. These include steelhead trout, cutthroat trout, Chinook salmon, coho salmon, chum salmon, pink salmon, and sockeye salmon. For each of their life stages, their needs look a little different. Salmonids begin their lives as eggs in freshwater. They then slowly become young fish called fry and make their way towards the estuary of the river where the salt water of the ocean meets the freshwater. After spending some time getting used to salt water, they then head out to sea as young adults where they feed and grow big and strong before returning to the same stream where they were born. Once there, they head to the location where they were born to spawn and lay their own eggs. For each stage of their time in freshwater, they prefer clean, cool water with a lot of oxygen. Salmon need the 3 C's to survive: water that is cold, clean, and clear. This means they need cold water that is free of pollutants and isn't cloudy. Though salmon need cold, clean, and clear water for most of their lives, they also have different needs for certain stages of their lives. Growing eggs need to be laid in areas of loose gravel and with flowing water to help the eggs stay protected and supply oxygen. Young salmon require a mix of salt and fresh water to help them transition from the river to the ocean. They also need logs or aquatic plants to help them hide from larger predators. Young adults spend 1 to 8 years in the open ocean where they feed on nutritious krill and other small marine invertebrates to help them grow big and strong so they can become breeding adults. As breeding adults, they make the strenuous journey back upriver to where they were born. This takes a tremendous amount of energy, so adult salmon require some deep pools and slow flowing water so that they can rest along the way.
Jenny Creek suckers are a funny-looking fish with an even funnier name. These fish get their name from their big lips, which are covered in little bumps called papillae, which help them scrub algae and tiny creatures off of rocks and stream beds, like the scrubby side of a sponge. They're endemic to this part of the United States, meaning that we only find Jenny Creek suckers here in Southern Oregon, specifically in Jenny Creek. This creek feeds into the Klamath River, so we can call Jenny Creek a tributary of the Klamath River. Tributaries are generally smaller than the rivers they feed into, which is perfect for our fishy friend, because Jenny Creek suckers like deep, clear, cold streams that aren't very steep, with slower flowing waters and lots of sunlight. This combination means that there's probably lots of algae and little organisms growing and living in the stream bed, which the Jenny Creek suckers can scrub off with their big, rough lips. Yum! The Jenny Creek suckers are also special because they're kind of stuck. At the top of their range in Jenny Creek, there are lots of human-made structures that are impossible for the fish to get through, like dams or other water diversions, or the land on either side of the creek isn't being held on the shore properly, which can lead to erosion. Erosion is when the soil is moved by water or wind, and in this case, It means that really little bits of soil are being swept away by the water and into the creek, which makes the water really cloudy. When the water gets too cloudy, sunlight can't pass through to the algae, so not as much algae grows. Less algae means less food for the Jenny Creek suckers. And would you choose to hang out where there wasn't a lot of food if there's a big buffet downstream? No. So that keeps the Jenny Creek suckers downstream of these points. But they can't go too far downstream because there's a big waterfall blocking the river. Uh-oh. In case that wasn't tough enough, these fish have some pretty nasty neighbors. Invasive species are organisms that move into an ecosystem and mess up the way things interact. They might eat more than their fair share, or maybe they destroy the stream banks and make the water too murky for algae to grow. In this case, there are some species that have moved into the creek that like to eat the young suckers, like non-native trout, and some species that can move into an ecosystem and reproduce really quickly, taking up all the food and nutrients in the creek, like New Zealand mud snails. What are some other things that might affect a species like the Jenny Creek suckers? Keep in mind they need cold, clear running water and lots of algae.
Next, we're going to talk about the Pacific lamprey. Lamprey are long, slender fish, and though they look similar to eels, they are not closely related. Lamprey have no jaws or bones and evolved hundreds of millions of years ago. They're even older than dinosaurs. There are 10 species of lamprey found in Oregon, with the Pacific lamprey being the most widespread. For their needs, lamprey require water that is cold, not polluted, and does not have barriers such as dams or culverts. Unlike salmon, which swim closer to the surface and are relatively agile, lamprey swim deeper and are not effective jumpers. Therefore, they are particularly at risk when barriers are in their habitat because they can't jump over them. Like salmon, lamprey spend their adult lives in the ocean and return to freshwater to spawn. After hatching, baby lamprey drift to calmer waters where they burrow into soft sediments of slowly moving freshwater streams. Here, they feed on algae and other tiny plants and animals. After a few years, they leave the sediment as juveniles and head to the sea where they are parasitic and feed on various fish and marine animals. Parasites, like some lamprey, are animals that benefit from their relationship with another animal, while the other animal does not get any benefits and may even be harmed by the relationship. After 1 to 3 years at sea, Pacific lamprey then return to freshwater to spawn, often returning to the same creek or river they were born in. Once lamprey become adults, they no longer feed and head to their spawning grounds. They may spend up to 1 year in freshwater before spawning. Spawning occurs in gravel-bottom streams where the cycle begins again. In conclusion, there are so many organisms that live in our rivers and streams, both native and invasive. These include our salmon, trout, Jenny Creek suckers, and Pacific lamprey, which all call the waters of Southern Oregon home. All of these species need the 3 C's: clear, cold, and clean or unpolluted waters. Was the last waterway you were in clear, cold, and clean? Something to think about next time you head out to the water. Thank you for joining us. Take care.